This presentation explores whether we can learn anything from looking at the drug reviews on WebMD. This is an example of a drug review from WebMD. This is a drug review on the drug Lexapro to treat the condition depression. And you can see that the ratings go from 1 to 5 star, and the reviewer can rate on effectiveness, ease of use, and satisfaction. So 5 stars being the highest, 1 star being the lowest. We downloaded over 140,000 reviews from WebMD that covered 1,500 drugs and over 1,100 conditions. And we applied statistical tests to find 427 drug comparisons where 2 drugs had significant and substantially different ratings. Here's an example of drugs with substantially different ratings. The condition is joint damage causing pain, and that there are 3 drugs where there are a lot of reviews for which we looked at the WebMD ratings. You can see that nabumethone has the lowest rating at 2.6 stars compared to the other drugs with 3.1 and 4.6 stars. If we look at the scientific literature on nabumethone, we see that the overall 6-month effectiveness rate is less for nabumethone than this other drug, meloxicam. And then also the median time to a good or excellent response was significantly shorter with this other drug, rofecoxib, versus nabumethone. So basically it takes a longer time to get a response with nabumethone compared to the other drugs. The literature supports that nabumethone does not perform as well as the other drugs, and the online reviewers also find this to be the case. In general, the WebMD reviews agree with literature and FDA. If we looked at all of the 429 comparisons that we did, 71% agreed with literature and FDA labels. And then when we required at least a 1-point rating difference between the 2 drugs, that is, it's like a 4-star review versus a 5-star review, then 82% of the drug comparisons were supported by literature and FDA labels. So it's great to see that what we see online agrees with what FDA and the scientific literature has shown, but what else can we learn from online reviews? One thing that we see is that addictive drugs are rated higher. For example, these 2 drugs, carbidopa and cyclobenzaprine, are used to treat muscle spasm, and the literature shows that they don't perform very different. They're not significantly different. But if we look at the ratings, we see that carbidopa has a much higher rating than cyclobenzaprine. And what you can see from the reviews is that you have things like, so far this has been the best medication to help me give me almost complete relief. And another review that says it's a great medication. So it seems like people who are taking carbidopa, the addictive drug, tend to rate it higher. And maybe these addictive properties are making them like the drug more. Interestingly, we also see that alternative treatments tend to be rated higher. And the question is, are these second-line treatments truly a better drug, or is it because people tried the first drug, the first line of treatment, and it didn't work well for them, and then when they had the second line of treatment that did work well, are they much happier now to find something that works for them? Here's an example where a second-line treatment ranks higher than the first-line treatment. So for rheumatoid arthritis, methotrexate is the first-line drug. That's the first drug that a doctor will prescribe for you. And in terms of 4-star and 5-star reviews, methotrexate gets 44% of its reviews are 4 or 5 stars, whereas etanercept is a second-line drug. That is, after doctors see that methotrexate doesn't work for you, they'll prescribe the second drug. And you can see that 74% of the reviewers gave it a 4 or 5-star rating. So this second drug actually rates higher than the first drug, but is it because patients had a bad experience with methotrexate, so when they finally were given etanercept and were happy with it, they rated it higher? Another example is underactive thyroid. Natural thyroid extract has a really high online rating of 3.92 compared to thyroxine, which has an online rating of 2.22. So that's a huge difference in ratings. But you can't get a prescription for natural thyroid extract because it was never FDA approved. Actually, natural thyroid extract existed before FDA came into existence, and it never got the approval. And so it's really hard to get it, and it's hard to get a prescription for it. Whereas thyroxine was approved by the FDA, and it's a synthetic thyroid hormone. This shows that accessibility can influence drug ratings. I found an example where generic actually rated higher than the brand name, and it didn't make sense to us because both were using the same ingredient. But this happened to be an asthma inhaler, and ProAir, which was the brand name, had a rating that was 2 stars lower than the generic. So when we looked into the reviews in more detail, we found that the brand name adopted this green, environmentally friendly design, which cost more money. But in doing so, they neglected to put in a counter that would count the number of doses remaining. So the generic inhaler, they would tell you how many doses you had remaining, and when you take a puff, it would tell you that, okay, you've taken a puff of the drug. Whereas the green design didn't have this feedback, and it didn't have this counter, so you didn't know how many puffs you had left, or if you actually were successful in taking a puff. So this is probably the reason for why it had a rating 2 stars lower than the generic, and ProAir later released a new design adding back that counter. In conclusion, online drug reviews agree with FDA and scientific literature. Even though reviewers give higher ratings to addictive drugs, we also learn when alternative treatments work well, and also when drug delivery design fails, and this can improve our current drug treatments.